would you slant or switch up the carnivore diet, or what would be your kind of tips and tricks for people with immune stuff who are going to do the carnivore diet as a healing mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a definite relationship between gut health and various autoimmune conditions, including skin conditions like psoriasis, eczema, and a whole host of other things. And so I think that we have to figure out why we're having a compromised gut integrity. And we, a lot of people have talked about the term leaky gut syndrome, where the lining of the gut is composed of all these cells that are held together by gap junctions. And so what happens is certain foods and medications can disrupt those gap junctions. So now you have things that kind of leak past that barrier, and they get into the body where they're not supposed to be there. And it might be some kind of bacterial lipopolysaccharide or some other, some other foreign compounds, and that sets up a chronic inflammatory or immune type condition, and then it shows up in rashes, and even it can be mental health problems. It can be a lot of joint pain, a whole bunch of different things. We see that, and so I think having a focus on the gut is very important. And so when we look at foods that tend to do that, and this is based on some of the research coming out of Hungary from the Paleomedicina group, who's looked at this specifically in a carnivore community. They saw that medications in particular, and even some supplements, can be very disruptive to the gut barrier. Seed oils particularly. So if you're cooking your meat in olive oil, even, that may potentially be problematic. Olive oil is technically a fruit oil, but so I think you just, and then there's all kinds, lectins and oxalates and nightshades and other foods that grains, sweeteners and sugars, those things can be problematic. And so if you're really dealing with a disease process and you really want to, eliminate all the potential things, then I think you just have to be fairly strict about it. I mean, I think you have to not indulge in artificial sweeteners, maybe give up coffee, certainly give up maybe alcohol. You have to, get rid of any kind of, some of the seasonings. You might just have to be bland, and maybe it's salt, some sort of meat, and water to drink. And, and I think there's some evidence. Some people think that maybe keeping your fat macro ratio is a little bit higher. There's a called Paleolithic ketogenic diet, where they like to keep fat macronutrient ratios at about 2 to 1. So you're eating about an 80% by calorie. It's a very ketogenic style diet, and so that might be a baseline for people to look at, but then again, you've got to give it enough time to adapt. You've got to be objective about it. The other thing that's important to realize, and I've learned this, not too long ago, is depending on what your previous diet was, things like oxalates in the diet. So if you were on a ketogenic diet, or even a vegan diet where you're eating a lot of leafy greens and vegetables, and you're getting a lot of oxalates, well, those things tend to take residence in our tissues in the body, and they can kind of leach out over a period of time. And so and sometimes they do it in sort of large doses, so it becomes an oxalate dumping type phenomenon. So it may be that, as you transition into the diet, if you're eating a heavily plant-based or ketogenic diet where those foods are very prominent, you might have to taper off of those things. And I think that's just something to be aware of, that you can flare up a problem with things like oxalate dumping as it goes from the tissue to the serum and then gets redistributed to other tissues. So that may be, may confuse things a little bit. So you might start out in the diet and your psoriasis gets better, and then all of a sudden it flares up. It might have been this problem where you've had, hyperoxaluria or hyperoxalemia, where you've got too much oxalate floating around your system just because it's leaching out of, wherever it's been for 20 years or 10 years or something like that. And so, but I do think being very strict is probably ultimately what you need to do for a while, and that's tough to do. Some people transitioning straight to, you're telling me I got to go from eating 100 different types of food to eating, beef, salt, and water. That's a tough one for a lot of people. And so it just may be that you realize that you're going to need, maybe you can start with a little bit more variety early on. Maybe you can do a little bit of, and dairy can be problematic for a lot of people, particularly with autoimmune disease and skin issues. So I don't want to minimize the point that dairy can be a problem. So, but for some people, variety works, and they can do eggs, and they can do different cuts of meat, and they may have a little bit of dairy and cheese, and they may have to cook with a little butter, and they have a little more spices just to make the diet more easy to transition to from a palatability standpoint and a variety standpoint, and more of a mostly a psychological standpoint. but then realize that if my psoriasis is still a problem, then I got to get tighter. I got to dial it in more, and I might have to drop the eggs. I might have to drop the dairy. I might have to, drop all these crazy seasonings and go to salt and then play with the fat ratios.
Awesome. So it's the good old fashioned stuff we teach on this channel constantly. It's simplify the diet, see what's going to digest and be the easiest for you. And don't give up. You got to stay consistent over the long term. Let the body do its thing. Be patient with the transition. So awesome. I think that's fantastic advice. I just wanted to mention we're at the hour mark. I don't know how you're doing with time.
Yeah, I can go for a little bit longer. Yeah, I was just going to say, because I've done a lot of just inquiries on people that have done, and I think, we can learn a lot from patients. I mean, it's very important to talk to people and see what the results are. And things with psoriasis, I saw that about 50% of the people within a month got a pretty good response on psoriasis, but there's 50% of the people where, it took 3 months or more. And so I think you just have to realize that sometimes these things are, they respond quickly and sometimes they don't. And, like I said, I think at some point you got to say, you just got to throw in the towel and say, hey, it ain't for me. But I think, just realize that may be 3 months or more before you've really given it an adequate trial. I mean, if it doesn't work for you in a week, I mean,
right.
That's probably not a good enough period of time. But at the same point, I don't think you should spend, 3 or 4 years, to kind of parody some of the vegans of detoxing. I mean, I think that's silly. I mean, if it doesn't work after a decent trial of several months, then look somewhere else.